So happy for everyone to join us for this incredible Affordable Housing Week event. This is going to be an awesome little workshop and presentation. I have been fortunate to hear Brian give this presentation in the past, and it's pretty awesome. I'm super excited to hear Susan join as well. So these are two very key leaders in the affordable housing sector in our community. And Brian Lloyd is the vice president of Beacon Development Group and also the board chair of the Housing Development Consortium. And Susan Boyd is the CEO of Bellwether Housing. So these are two really powerful champions for affordable housing in our community, and we would just proud to have them here to join us. So please welcome Susan and Brian. Let you take it away from here.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to start off. Thank you, Chad. And thanks to everybody at HDC for all the great things that are happening during Affordable Housing Week. It's a really nice opportunity to be able to, come together. I think we've got some physical in-person events as well as virtual events, and just really focus on our community's need for affordable housing, as well as the things that are happening in the community to try to meet that need. So Brian and I are going to talk a little bit about how affordable housing gets built from a financial standpoint. I'm going to talk a little bit, define a little bit about what we mean when we're talking about affordable housing, some of the historic trends and policies around funding affordable housing, as well as the needs, and how policy and need has shifted over time, and hopefully set kind of a platform for you to ask questions about whether our policies are well designed to meet the need or not. Brian's going to spend some time talking about the tools most frequently used to fund and finance affordable housing, as well as the process for developing housing. And then we'll talk about some kind of new things on the horizon, or just newly available to us, and some things that we're hoping for in the future. I want we want to engage as best we can, have this be a conversation. It's always challenging on these kinds of remote events. But if you have questions throughout the presentation, please raise your virtual hand. I think you do that through the reactions. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. Through the reactions, raise your hand. Jesse and Chad will help us keep track of that, and we'll call on you. You'll be otherwise muted. But we do want to, if you do have a question, we'll have you say your question out loud. We do have a big crowd here, so we might, if lots of people have questions, we might not be able to get to them all, but we'll do our best and try to leave a little time, excuse me, at the end, where we can just converse. So we're gonna, we do have a slideshow for you. So we can, why don't you go ahead and bring that up, Jesse? So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the problem we're trying to solve, and for whom we're trying to solve it. When we the term affordable housing is used by lots of different people to talk about lots of different things, but when we're using it here, we're going to be using it in a very particular way, and it is consistent with the federal definition of what that means. The federal definition of affordable is housing for which a household is paying no more than 30% of its monthly income towards housing costs. So that's rent or mortgage and utilities primarily. And when we're talking about affordable to whom, we're talking about people with low, very low, or extremely low household incomes. And those are federal definition, again, low income, 80% of the area median income, very low, 50% and below, and extremely low, 30% and below. And just to sort of put some of these numbers on the map for you, like someone whose income is at a level that is like, say they're earning, say they collect SSI benefits, supplemental security insurance benefits every month, their income's more at like 12 or 15% of the area median income. So there's plenty of people in pretty far down in that income bracket. Okay, any questions there? I'm seeing some flashes on the chat, but didn't see what the content was.
Someone was just asking if this PowerPoint would be available, and I'm sure Chad can figure out how to make it available on the HDC website.
Yeah, sure thing. Okay, next slide. Just some pictures. These are all of buildings in Bellwether's portfolio. They're kind of, it's a variety. I wanted to show kind of a variety of what affordable housing looks like. Up in the upper left corner, we've got Arbora Court. That building was completed in 2018, one of our newer buildings. It's 133 units. It's located at the corner of 50th and 15th Avenue Northeast up in the University District, and predominantly family units. We've got kind of going clockwise, the Cambridge Apartments there, old historic building, former kind of hotel, beautiful restored lobby, and sits on First Hill, kind of right behind the freeway. 152 studios in that building. And then we've got our First and Vine Apartments, which is a building for seniors and disabled people, all one bedrooms, about I think 85 units or so, down in downtown. So a good sampling there. Certainly there's other varieties, but just to give you a sense. Next slide. So talk a little bit about the need and how that's changed over time. And I want to give a shout out to one of my board members, Professor Greg Colburn from the University of Washington, runs Dad's School, who talked in a panel on at the opening for Affordable Housing Week. These slides are from a presentation that he's done and might even be in his book, called Homelessness as a Housing Problem. So this first slide here shows the difference in change over time of incomes versus rents. So that red line showing that since 1970 or so, incomes, CPI adjusted incomes have gone up only like 20%, whereas rents have gone up 50%. So just highlighting the affordability gap getting bigger and bigger over time. And the next chart there, showing how the housing cost burden, meaning the amount of person's income that is being dedicated towards their housing costs, is different depending on what your income level is. So we've got the bottom tertile, or the bottom third. And Brian, you owe me a couple of quarters for saying that word.
Well done.
Having high housing cost burden going from 30% up to 50%, what we describe as being extremely cost burdened. And then you see the middle and upper incomes being much less cost burdened, which makes sense, is intuitive to all of us. And showing some in the next slides. Oh, sorry, was that did you go to the yeah, sorry, I missed that one. Also probably, oh, I'm sorry, not surprising that the graph here on the left showing the difference in rent burden depending on race. And then the next slide showing a little bit how that plays out in King County, and this notion of cost burden comes up again. So we can see that households, that bottom bar, households with incomes of 80% AMI and above, really very few of them are almost none severely cost burden. Very few are cost burden, paying 30 to 50% of their incomes for rent, and most of them being unburdened. And then you see how that changes as incomes go down, looking up the chart there. So 70% of extremely low income households being severely cost burdened in King County. This, and actually, can you go back to that slide? I just want to take a moment. This, and credit this slide. This slide is from the King County Regional Affordable Housing Dashboard. Jesse's put a link to the dashboard in the chat. This dashboard has some pretty amazing data in it. It's very interactive. You can dig deep down into like what specific jurisdictions are doing around production of affordable housing, and look at just various measures of the availability of affordable housing and the need. So I encourage you all to go there and check that out. Okay, sorry, next slide. This slide is from a McKinsey report that was published a few years ago on the need for affordable housing in King County. And the thing I appreciate about this particular slide is it highlights the loss of affordability over time. So not only do we have this increasing population influx, but we have an actual loss of units affordable to people whose incomes are 80% and below the area median income. That little strip on the bottom of housing units available to people at 30% and below area median income, that's like public housing, and there's sort of a steady supply there. Hasn't gone up much, but it has stayed stable. But then you see how in the dark blue and the medium blue, where it's 30 to housing affordable at those income levels, has actually decreased significantly since 2010. And those are units that essentially have fallen out of affordability because of rising rents. So we are, as organizations like mine and Brian's, kind of build affordable housing, put it in the bucket of need, we've got this big hole in the bottom of how affordable housing that is just sitting in the market going away because rents are going up. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about how housing policy has changed over time. Early housing policy which is kind of started just post-depression, really focused on the terrible conditions that we had in some of our cities and even rural areas to improve those housing conditions. Today, our real focus is on creating affordability. We've fixed some of these terrible conditions with pretty robust regulations around the kinds of housing about occupancy standards, but we still have, of course, an affordability problem. Early policy really focused on the state provision of housing supply, increasing housing supply. So a lot of emphasis on public housing, a lot of investment in the work that like housing authorities are doing, and state-owned, state-produced, and by state we just mean government-produced housing. In the middle of in the 1970s and 80s, we sort of switched to a more emphasis on, instead of building housing, we gave people vouchers, which allowed them to go access housing in the market. And in 1986, we created the low-income housing tax credit, which is a primary driver of housing production today. And Brian will spend quite a bit of time talking about that tool. And today you can see that this investment in public housing, really there's been very little in that pink bar along that pink part of the bars over time. We have seen, and then the gray bar is other kinds of HUD subsidized private development, which has also fallen off. So really very little federal investment, direct federal investment in the production of housing. Instead, federal money has been switched over to this the voucher program, which again gives people access to rent, to be able to rent in the market, and then the low-income housing tax credit program. Next slide. Again, this is just another way of showing how this has changed over time. On the federal side in particular, real emphasis on giving people sort of the supply side power, and which is a great policy if you have supply. If you don't, it just creates, or I'm sorry, it gives you the demand side power. So you have a renter with a voucher going out to look for housing. But if you don't have enough supply out there, it's very hard to find that. And we see that in King County, where people with vouchers have a very hard time finding housing that is for which they will qualify with their voucher. So after all of that, I just want to sort of boil it down to, we've got, we have, and ask you a question. This is a little bit of a quiz. Given everything I just said, what is your guess here? Which federal agency runs the nation's largest housing production program? The Department of Housing and Urban Development, perhaps a logical choice. The Department of Agriculture might sound like a sort of far out choice, but actually the USDA funds the production of rural housing. The Department of Health and Human Services might make sense to some of you. They actually don't have a housing production program. The answer is the Department of Revenue, the Internal Revenue Service, through the Federal Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. It is a very complicated program, and having it sort of join in with be part of bring in private investment makes it a very nuanced and complicated program, but it also makes it a program that is supported by both sides of the political aisle, Republicans, Democrats. It was a public Republican-inspired program, and Democrats like it because it produces housing. So in that way, it at least has a lot of political support. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk about the process for development and how we put the various sources together for housing.
Hey, everybody. Jesse, would you mind just continuing to share in advanced slides? It's great to be with you. I'm glad so many people came out for this. It's a fun conversation. I hope the Zoom setup isn't too off-putting. We really do want to hear your questions and comments. So feel free to put those in the chat or put your hands up so we can catch your conversations as we go. It's more fun to have a discussion than a lecture. So help us out if you would. I am going to come back to the tax credit program and explain a little bit more why the the taxing agency runs our housing programs and how that works. But first, I wanted to go through the process of affordable housing real estate development and highlight a few places where it's similar and different from conventional real estate development. So first of all, like with any real estate development, you have to come up with a project concept. Next slide. So in affordable housing, what you're asking yourselves as a developer is, who are you going to serve? What population needs to have affordable housing provision in your community, whatever community that might be? Is it folks who are homeless? Is it folks who are coming out of domestic violence situations? Is it veterans, farm workers? Is it working families? There are a multitude of different types of affordable housing populations that we serve. And the first question is, who's the right organization to serve the defined population? Then after you've made those decisions, you go into sort of regular real estate development mode. You are going to consider the site, the environmental situation, what are the title conditions on that site. You'll run some initial design studies to see what kind of massing and zoning permissions are allowed. Then you would start to build a pro forma by developing the costs. How much is the site going to cost you? What's the construction, design, financing, and soft costs? And that's how you start to build your uses side of your pro forma. And then you'll have to figure out how will you pay for the construction costs and all the other soft costs. So asking yourself, what are your sources of funds? Will you need local subsidy from providers like the Office of Housing or the state of Washington, and how much? Are you going to use tax credits? Are you competitive? What's the equity raise from your particular project? And then you'll also be asking yourself if you need operating sources, operating subsidy as well to run the project over time. Next slide. Then when you have a solid concept, then you get to assemble multiple funding applications to multiple sources. So generally the way it works in Washington is you assemble your local funding first. So city or county funds, and then your state funds. And in the end, you seek out tax credits and bond financing if that's the type of project you're developing. Someone just asked what median income is. Susan, maybe you could help me with that. Do you have that on the tip of your tongue? Do you want to look it up?
Well, we can go back to that original chart, which and extrapolate, because it depends on the household size. Is there an easy way to pop us back there, Jesse? Thank you. So if you're good at your algebra, well, actually, you can just go to 50% of area median income and multiply it by 2, and you get to what is the median income for, this is a King County number here, for 1, 2, 3, and 4-person households. So for a 4-person household, it's about $106,000 a year. For a 1-person household, it's about $77,000 a year, something like that.
Great, thank you. So I see a question about the tax credits and generating capital, and I will get to that. So funding applications. So if you're assembling your funds from various sources and trying not to spend too much pre-development capital while you're getting to yes. And sometimes getting to yes takes a long time. Funding sources come around once, maybe twice a year. And sometimes you have to go 2, maybe even 3 times through the process to get funding. So it's very difficult, challenging process to succeed. There's not enough resources, and so it makes it competitive and challenging. Next slide. So then on to designing your building and seeking permits. This is very much similar to conventional real estate, except a key difference here is that the capital that that conventional real estate uses to maintain its buildings and renovate its buildings is not generally available to affordable housing. So a conventional real estate owner will either sell their building and then the buyer will refinance it and renovate and recapitalize, or the owner might have sufficient cash flow to provide renovations along the way. Affordable housing doesn't have that those opportunities. Rents are restricted, so there's very little cash flow. And the point is to retain the housing and continue to preserve the housing long term. So affordable housing providers generally do not sell the buildings to recapitalize them. So that means you need a long-term, well-designed, bulletproof building that will last for 15, 20, 25 years before it needs capital reinvestment. But because the sources are limited, you need to do that as inexpensively as possible. So it's challenging in that regard. Also, there are funding requirements like sustainability requirements, prevailing wages required, and other things that will influence your design decisions. Next slide. So now you've got your permits, you're ready to proceed, but before you can proceed with construction, you got to close the financing, which always feels like a hockey fight, because everybody's got their own opinions and their own lawyers, and it's a pretty friendly hockey fight, but still. Next slide. So each of these projects generally has 3 to 5, sometimes even 6 or 7 different lenders. Each of those lenders has a different attorney working on their interests. So it gets complicated. The priority agreement is a key document that determines the lien and regulatory rights of each of those lenders, who's first, second, third, etc. And a big part of our job when we close loans and project financing is trying to manage the guarantees that the investors and the lenders require. Those would include construction completion guarantees, delivery of the tax credits, and coverage of operating deficits during the operating period of the project. So suffice it to say that there's a lot of risk involved in developing and owning affordable housing. And so those risks have to be carefully understood and managed. Next slide. Construction, that's the fun part. I see a couple folks from construction firms that we know and love out there. Good to see you guys. And this is why we do it, either the construction part or the renovation part. So improving or providing new housing for folks. And that contractor relationship is absolutely critical. So there aren't a lot of contractors that do the work because it is complicated achieving these particular requirements around sustainability and wages and so forth means that a lot of contractors aren't prepared to take on that level of complexity. So we appreciate the partners that we do have in the industry. Okay, last slide in this part of the project, or this part of the presentation, next slide, is management and lease up. So once you've built the building, you thought that was complicated. Now you have to manage the building. And it's so complicated that I am not in management. I leave that to people like Susan who can bear the challenges of operating and owning affordable housing. It is definitely challenging. Not only do you have to meet all the obligations that you promised to meet when you got the funding, but you also have to live in the real world of dealing with residents and neighbors and communities and the challenges that occur in day-to-day life. So that's a bit about the process. Now I want to talk about how affordable housing is funded. Next slide. So I mentioned the local, state, and federal resources. Those come into projects in two ways. Sometimes those are capital side subsidies. In other words, funds that help offset the cost of acquiring and or building affordable housing. And then there's the operating side subsidies. So funds that help offset the operations and maintenance and services that are provided in affordable housing. So let me talk about where those local subsidies come from. At the local or city and county level, funding comes from the federal government in the form of pass-through dollars through what's called the CDBG and home programs. Those programs exist, but they have not been keeping up with the cost or need for affordable housing. So they're becoming a smaller and smaller part of the funding pie. A growing part of the funding pie is local property tax levies. We're lucky to live in a city here in Seattle. For those of you who are here in Seattle with me, we live in a city that has the oldest, I believe, property tax levy program. It's some 35 years old. We'll be coming up with a new levy vote next year. And it's a key way that we generate affordable housing funds. City of Bellingham, City of Vancouver, and King County also have property tax levies that help support housing. Let's go on to the next slide. The state is a key source for funding. If you could go back one, Jesse. Oh, no, I guess you're right. Sorry. So this slide shows you the funding that has been invested in housing through the Housing Trust Fund, now a portion of the Commerce Department. And you'll see a couple things. One, if you look at the pink number, that's the state provided investment in the Housing Trust Fund. This comes from the capital budget that happens every 2 years. And it took a very long time for us to recover from the 2008 recession and get investments back up to where they were in the 07-09 biennium, which is pretty surprising to me. And then it shot off the charts for two reasons. One, the pink part in 2021, 2023, the pink part is due to the growing awareness that our state legislators across the state have about housing insecurity and the crisis of affordable housing in our communities. And then the goldenrod portion reflects the investment that came through the COVID recovery investments. So those are one-time funds. We don't expect to see those on an ongoing basis, but a significant portion of those investments were put into housing, especially what they call the rapid housing acquisition. So acquiring market rate properties and hotel properties to serve homeless or extremely low income households. Next slide. There are also other state programs that create housing resources, direct appropriations. There are recording fees. Those numbers 2060, 2063, and 1277 refer to bills that directed recording fees toward housing. The real estate excise tax is a source of funding, and a relatively new one, the 1590, allowed jurisdictions to set aside, or not set aside, but to add 0.1% to their sales tax collections, and those funds would be gathered and invested in affordable housing locally. So King County has done that, City of Bellevue has done that, a number of other jurisdictions. Next slide. Okay, and then the federal level, there are numerous places where federal funding comes from. Susan mentioned many of the primary ones. Low-income housing tax credit and vouchers are the most predominant. This is a slide showing how many different places and quantifying the amounts that the funding comes from. I won't try to go into this too deeply, but you can get a sense of where the money is coming from. I guess the one thing I want to point out is the top left box there, the Jumpstart payroll tax. So again, City of Seattle passed a payroll tax on high earners working for companies that are located in the City of Seattle. And that's actually expected to provide a significant amount of investment in affordable housing. It hasn't really come into play yet. The program is not in place, but we housing providers are excited to see that program should start creating housing investments here in the next year or two.
And something I'll just highlight too is how many of these funds in general are new appropriations. So Jumpstart's new from last year. Mandatory housing affordability has been in place for about 2 years. The housing levy is longstanding. Then there's these federal tax credit investments. The state housing trust fund has grown a bunch. Rapid acquisition is entirely new. Health through housing, new as of last year. And then another thing too, contrasting the level of funding by the City of Seattle in King County against all of the East Side's direct contributions.
Thanks, Jesse. Okay, let's dig into the low-income housing tax credit. Susan made a great introduction. It was signed into law by the Gipper himself, Ronald Reagan, in 1986. A significant tax reform milestone. And because there was a perception that a lot of the tax benefits were going to wealthy individuals and corporations, someone came up with the idea of the low-income housing tax credit program as a way to create some benefit for low-income households. Nobody ever thought it would last for, 35 years now, and that it would become so popular across the aisle. So it began in 1986. It's a federal tax incentive that encourages private investments. So the money comes from private corporations. You can think of it as a triangle. The federal government provides developers like Susan and me a tax credit award. And then the developer sells that tax credit benefit to a private corporation. And so the capital goes to the housing provider to offset the cost of developing or acquiring affordable housing. And then the corporation gets a tax benefit from the federal government. So they have a direct reduction of their tax liability, and it's a 10-year credit period. So they have this tax credit benefit guaranteed for them for a 10-year period in exchange for providing that investment. So everybody wins. The developer gets equity for the project, the corporation gets a tax benefit, and the federal government gets the production of affordable housing for its communities. There are two types of credit, a 9% credit, which is very competitive and very limited. Each state gets a certain amount, and there's always much greater demand than credit available. 9% credits are generally used to serve the lowest income populations in the state. So a lot of homeless projects or rural projects are funded with the 9% program. The 4% program is a more shallow subsidy. So it's generally used for households at 50 and 60% of area median income. And that comes along with a bond allocation, a tax-exempt bond allocation, which is also growing more and more competitive in the state of Washington and across the country. Primarily, the investors involved in this are banks, but there are also economic investors. In other words, investors that are seeking just a return. Nobody does this for from the goodness of their heart. These investments are made with an economic return for the corporations. Banks kind of get a double whammy because they get an economic return, but they also get a Community Reinvestment Act benefit. Non-banks do it just for the economics. So insurance companies or tech companies will sometimes act as investors. The last line there, the money is not debt, it's equity. So it's not paid back. The benefits to the investor come through that tax credit that comes through the IRS. Okay. Let's look at how you get the credit into a deal. So this example is a $1 million credit award has been made to me as a developer and owner of affordable housing. So in the competition for tax credits, my project won the beauty contest. It served the right population. It was in the right location, etc. So I got the $1 million annual allocation. So I'm going to set up a limited partnership that will own the project, and it's made up of the sponsor or the developer as a 0.01% partner and a limited partner, the investor, who's the 99.99% participant. That tax credit is $1 million for 10 years, so a total tax benefit of $10 million. So as a developer, I'm going to put that on the market. This is the part the Republicans love because it's market driven. The market decides how much money I get for this $10 million benefit or the $10 million in tax credits that I'm going to sell. So in this example, the price that I'm able to generate, next click, is 95 cents per credit. Okay, so $9.5 million in equity generated by this $10 million investment. 95 cents would be great. These days, the credit price is lower than it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago. It used to be in excess of $1 per credit because there are other benefits involved too. Regular depreciation-driven losses could drive the price per credit above $1. Right now, it's around 95 cents for a really prime project with a top-notch sponsor in a great real estate market. Next slide. But if you put that out to the market and the market is softer or the project is a little bit tougher real estate location or a weaker sponsor, that price is different. Again, the market is deciding what price to pay for that credit. So here, the credit, the price per credit is 85 cents in this example, so the total equity is at 8.5. That $1 million difference has to be made up by someone, and it's generally the public subsidy providers who have to pick up that difference. So public subsidy providers love a strong real estate market in terms of the credit, because it increases their ability to leverage projects. In other words, they can put in less money per project than if the real estate market is soft. I'm sorry, the investment market is soft. Okay. I'm going to take a breath. Any questions about the tax credit?
Ryan, I have a question.
Yes, please.
So can you talk about what happens? So when Donald Trump was elected to office, there was a big sort of shift, like there was a lot of anxiety in the tax credit market. Can you talk about like how major macroeconomic trends or tax policy influences the value of the credit?
Yes. So the Trump tax reform did a couple things that changed the market calculation for tax credits. One is it reduced the corporate tax rate. So that meant corporations had less incentive to protect or reduce their tax liability. Their overall tax liability went down, so their need for tax credits also went down. So that's created a softer investment market. There was also something done about the depreciation. Depreciation was shortened, and that also had the effect of softening the market or lowering the equity price somewhat. So this is a great slide here. You can see on the left of this is the 2016 credit prices, and then there was a cliff. The Trump tax reform dropped the credit prices by, what was that, like 10 or 15 cents, depending on where you were located. And that is a lot of equity lost to the affordable housing industry. So that's a big deal. Another question in the chat was, who sets the price per credit? That is decided by the investors. They're deciding based on the risk and based on the other places that they can put their investment money, how much return do they need to get to make this investment and to offset that risk. So it's not set by the Fed, it's not set by HUD or anyone. It's each investor deciding what risk return ratio they can accept. Who sets the quantity of tax credits? So the 9% credit is set by federal legislation, and it's what, $2.70 per capita, I think, something like that. So every state gets $2.70 of tax credits per year based on its population. The 4% program is based on bond allocation, and that is also a fixed amount of tax credit, tax exempt bond allowance that's provided to each state each year.
Can I answer that question in a slightly different way? So that's sort of how the amount of credit that's sort of in the country is determined and within each state. Within each project, the amount of credit for any project is based on the the size of the investment in the affordable housing. And there's, as Brian pointed out, there's two different kinds of credits, something we call the 9% credit and something we call the 4% credit. And those, more or less, they the amounts are such that the equity generated under the 9% credit is about like 40 to maybe 50%, and of the whole cost of the project. And the equity generated, oh, perfect, thank you. The equity generated under the 4% program is 30 to 40%. This is from a project that Bellwether is working on in collaboration with Plymouth Housing, where it's a high rise, 17 stories. The first 5 stories will be Plymouth units, 115 units of housing for formerly homeless seniors. Floors 6 through 17 will be housing for low-income households, studios, 1, 2, 3 bedroom units. And these are the two different illustrations of the two different kinds of financing packages that made each one possible. So the dark pink there you see is the credit and how much is generated by each program, one having that more lucrative 9% credit and one having the slightly less lucrative 4% credit. The project that the Bellwether side of the equation has this tax exempt bond portion, which is debt that we can carry because we have a little bit of income from rents that we can use to support some debt. The Plymouth version has no permanent debt because they collect much less rent and cannot afford to support long-term debt. And then you can see the range of public support in there as well.
So let's go on. I think the next slides will illustrate something that Susan was just touching on, is both how are these projects different from each other and how are they different from conventional real estate in terms of the capital stack and also in terms of the operating pro forma. So let's go to the next slide. So on the left, each of these are $20 million hypothetical real estate deals. On the left, that $20 million is paid for with $14 million of bank debt and $6 million of owner equity. That would be more, a reasonable breakdown of owner equity and leverage debt for a conventional deal. Now, on the affordable deal on the right, you see there's a lot more layers. So there is no owner equity, or if there is, it's very limited, because the way that owner equity on the left gets paid back is when they flip the deal or sell it, and the appreciation in the market pays off that owner for making that that risk-based owner equity investment. But on the affordable side, the housing is going to be permanently affordable. Hopefully, that's what it should be. And so there isn't an opportunity nor a desire to sell the project and recapture that. So there's not owner equity in the deal. And there's no way to support $14 million of bank debt because the rents are restricted. So there might be a little bit of bank debt on the project that you saw there, the Madison Boylston project. There was some debt. So here on this project, there's $2 million of debt out of $20 million, about 10%. But the rest is made up of tax credit equity and city, county, and state funds. So next slide. On the operating side, let's look at a conventional deal. So here, the gray bar is meant to represent the market rents that are collected. You would deduct your operating expenses, deduct your debt payments, and if you're lucky or you've done your homework, you would have some cash flow. But on an affordable deal, let's look at the next slide. This is a 50 and 60% AMI project. So it's going to have some rents, but they're lower than the market rate rents. Probably have a little bit higher operating expenses and minimal debt payments, with the outcome being very limited cash flow. Now, if you're doing a 30% AMI project or below, these are extremely low income folks. And so the rents are even more restrictive, operating expenses, and probably some supportive services needed to support the population, stabilize folks as they come maybe out of homelessness or other problem situations. And so then just to break even, this is where you will want or need some operating subsidy, like Section 8 vouchers or operating and maintenance funds from the city or state, or some sort of service program dollars to break even. So as you can see in these cases, there's very limited upside, and most of the time we are just working hard to keep up with costs, especially lately as costs increase faster than rents, costs like utilities, insurance, maintenance, supplies, things of that nature. So we are flying here. I am going to conclude my remarks and hand this back over to Susan to close us out with some thoughts about where affordable housing might be headed. And I look forward to answering your questions at the end.
Thanks, Brian. So one reality that we're living with right now, our sector across the country were really hopeful that Build Back Better, which included a credit improvement provisions that would have greatly increased the amount of credits available to generate new affordable housing, would have passed last year, but it did not, and things do not look that great for it right now. So we don't have, right now, there's not a whole lot of hope that the credit program is going to get a lot bigger in the near future. And that means that as local resources kind of increase, and we've kind of tapped out the ability of those local resources to leverage that credit equity that Brian talked about, it kind of means that any more projects that are going to happen are going to have to be funded solely with other things than the credit. So, maybe just public subsidies, or maybe public subsidies with some other kind of creative debt. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some other kinds of resources that some of us are experimenting with. One that I know our organization and a couple others have done is raising money from families and foundations that are willing to invest their money at pretty low return rates. We call them almost philanthropic return rates, like 2% interest, for a long enough period of time to really allow us to get a project off the ground. So could be like 15 years. So we went out, we've raised over the past, since 2015, we've raised about $10 million in private investments just from people in the community who have money to invest, and instead of putting it in a certificate of deposit or some other low return device, or even a high return device, but because they care about the social return of building affordable housing, they loan it to us and we put it in projects. Helps us stretch that public investment a little bit further. The other thing that I want to mention is that some of the corporate investments that have been happening. And they've really been kind of the only new thing to happen in kind of new in character thing to happen in affordable housing in a while. So Microsoft sort of first out of the gate in our region, and then Amazon following with a pretty enormous investment. And those two companies are making return loans and equity investments into housing and taking lower return than a market return on their investments. And that has allowed us to do some interesting things. We have used the Amazon Housing Equity Fund, for example, to pair with some more conventional kinds of debt to acquire what we call housing that is out there in the market where the rents are still pretty affordable, pull it off the market and hold rents where they, to allow us to hold rents close to where they are on affordability for a long time. So we've got a couple buildings under our belt that we've done with that model using no public subsidy, other than we do. I think we probably will get a property tax exemption that helps quite a bit actually, but using just that private money. I've heard that, and I know Amazon has invested in some of the transit sites and is putting money into new construction. Their emphasis had originally been on these acquisitions of buildings out there that still have affordability, that, you know, if we can pull them off the market, we can prevent displacement from some of those neighborhoods where rents are rapidly rising. So those are some new trends. I know there's been some other private investments that have come in through Opportunity Zone. A shout out to Community Roots Housing, who I know has is working on a project that's got some Opportunity Zone investments in it. I'm not going to be able to tell you enough about how Opportunity Zone credits work, but it is also a tax-driven investment vehicle. Brian, are there any other? Well, I'll say that next year is the renewal of the Seattle Housing Levy, and we hope that we'll be able to renew that at a pretty high level. I just want to say, like, the King County Regional Affordable Housing Task Force published a report in 2018 that said that concluded in order to meet the need for housing for low-income households over the next 5 years, which, you know, will be up in a couple of years, we need to create 44,000 units of housing affordable to households at 50% and below area median income. So we're more than halfway through that time period, and we've generated not even a couple of thousand yet. I think 1,500 out of 44,000. So we are not quite there in meeting the need, I will say. Think big when you're thinking about the housing levy next year, and bring your advocacy energy when it comes time to pass that levy.
And I would add to that, Susan, that a countywide levy or funding resource is due. Seattle's doing a great job, and we need to continue to support the Seattle Housing Levy, but the county needs to catch up in terms of how much money it's willing to invest in this problem, in this challenge, because as we see in every community across King County and across the state, housing insecurity and homelessness is ever present. It's no longer just located in a few urban areas, it's across the state. I saw a question on the chat asking a few different things. Let's see if I can answer these. Someone asked about the credit period. When does the tax credit run out? So the tax credit is a 10-year credit, and the investor has the obligation to make sure that the tax credit is serving its intended purpose. In other words, that the population being served is indeed low income according to the application for those credits. They're obligated to do that for 15 years. So they get a 10-year benefit, then they're in for 5 more years to oversee compliance. And then generally they exit the partnership, they exit the deal, and the original sponsor, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, owns the project for its remaining useful life. So compliance, I said the word compliance, that's a key issue in this process. These, the households, I mean, unfortunately, I wish there were a different way to do this because it's a little invasive to have to report your income all the time, but the funding sources, both tax credit and public sources, they want to know that the investments that they've made are serving low-income households. So there is an ongoing compliance requirement where households report their income. Is it annual, Susan, or did that change?
Yeah, so they do report household income annually, but the test for credit eligibility is household income upon initial occupancy. If a household income goes up over the limit while they're living in the building, they're not forced to move out, or in many cases not forced even to pay more rent. The program allows them to stay, but so the test is for tax purposes at the time of move-in, but we do income certifications every year.
So a big compliance component to this effort. And then the other question was about transaction costs. And yes, tax credit program is the employment program specially made for accountants and lawyers. So it is a complicated process. There is a lot of overhead. It's not the most efficient way to create affordable housing. However, it is the most successful and sustainable way because it's the way that works. HUD has been defunded most every year since Newt Gingrich's Republican Revolution back in whatever that was, 1994. But the tax credit program has continued to grow converts and supporters because of that multiple-sided benefit that the program creates.
Brian, I think another part of that question on what happens when the tax credit runs out is getting to what happens in terms of affordability when you hit the end of the 15-year compliance period. Susan, do you think you could describe a little bit like how Bellwether's approached that end of 15-year exit?
Well, I will say that when you use the credits, you get you are subject to a regulatory agreement that typically requires you to keep rents affordable for at least for 35 years. And then when you use these other public sources, those restrictions can be 50 or 75 years. So the affordability requirements are virtually perpetual. And notwithstanding the fact that your investor has earned their credit after those 10 years. Brian, do you have more on that?
No, that's exactly what I would say. All right, someone else has got some questions out there. Is the lack of funding to HUD impacting quality of public housing? Oh my gosh, yes. We could, our housing authority friends could talk about this at length. So the disinvestment in public housing is significant, and it's significantly impacting projects that were funded by the federal government. Those production programs are have basically been ended, but there's still a lot of public housing out there that was built by those programs, and they get annual allocations of funds to maintain that public housing. But that investment has not kept up with the need. So aging stock is rapidly deteriorating, and the funds are not available to improve or maintain them. So what it's doing is it's forcing housing authorities to get creative, and there are some federal programs that are basically converting public housing to vouchered housing with private debt. So removing stock from the public housing stock to, they're still owned and operated by housing authorities, but they're generating private debt to create the investment necessary to improve the buildings. So it's just a different model, but it's unfortunate that public housing is not supported in our system of government and our system of economic investments. Public investment is not popular, and so that has decreased over time significantly, leaving the market to try to deal with affordable housing. But the market does things because it makes money, and so there's not a lot of money to be made in affordable housing, and so there's not a lot of public or private investment, except when there are things like tax exempt bonds or tax credits to create an incentive.
I just want to bring it home one other point about the federal housing policy and how it affects high cost markets like Seattle. When the shift goes to putting vouchers in the hands of low income people, which seems like a really nice idea, empower low income people to go find their own housing throughout the market. But when you have a market like Seattle or San Francisco or wherever, or anywhere in the Puget Sound, where we're just not producing enough housing for the population here, you're not fixing the problem. You're giving people the power to go out and buy housing that doesn't exist. So it's a mismatch. And we're not growing the production side, which is now the tax credit program, fast enough to create enough housing to meet the demand. And so we've just got we've got a bit of a policy mismatch, which is kind of what my lead-in was all about. I see that Cindy asked a question. Arch is worried about the double-digit rent hikes that might be coming because of the AMI increases. So every year, HUD publishes what the new median incomes are for each metropolitan area. And this year, and our rents are set typically at what is deemed to be affordable for a particular income level. So when you heard both of us talk about units affordable to people at 50% of area median income or 60% of area median income. So in King County this year, we saw those median income numbers, because of all tech job influence and lots of high income new jobs, that median income number bumps up. It bumped up like 18% this year, which means if your your rent levels are tracking that. So now what was affordable to a household at 60% of, let's see, what was the rent for that 60% unit last year has now gone up 18% because the AMI, the median income level has gone up 18%. So if you were hitting that, if you were increasing rents to be that maximum allowable rent under the HUD guidelines, they would go up that much. I don't know what, how the East, I don't know how all of the subsidy providers are handling that, but I know that in Seattle, where most of our housing is, and most of our housing is subject to a regulatory agreement from the city of Seattle, they actually, and we would do this anyway, we are not going to raise our rents more than a few percentile in any one year, especially as we're coming out of the pandemic. But it's it is something that is going to happen by people who are not either profit motivated developers who are in this field, and there are many, more than nonprofits actually, and places where there isn't another regulator in the mix who is saying, no, you can't raise rents over a certain amount. Cindy, I hope that was on point there. Why do they keep using the median versus weighted averages or a different metric? Because it seems there's a growing disparity between those in the upper income brackets and the lower income brackets. Yeah, there may very well be a good reason to kind of shift the whole way we think about affordability, and but this is how this is how every program out there is designed right now. I can't answer your question about why, other than you know, inertia.
And I will point out that median is not affected by very high earners. You're talking about the 50th percentile earner within the area. So it's distorted by basically, any distortions would be between like the middle income earners and then low income earners. It's not so much, it's not like a pure average where you're just dividing up the total income earned by the number of people.
Right. It's the one in the middle. But that still goes, it still goes, it's not, so it's not thrown off by Jeff Bezos, but it is thrown off by lots and lots of jobs being created at 150K a year. Right. Restricted income base for seniors and disabled does not increase, and I mean, increases very, very little. And a lot of those tenants with extremely low incomes really can't be in, they need rent subsidies even to be in tax credit supported buildings.
Any other questions out there? All right, well, this has been fun. I thank you all for coming, for being interested in affordable housing, and make sure you give gives some love to the folks who are in this industry, because as you got a little taste, it is not easy place to be doing work. And so I thank you for supporting this work, and I thank everybody on here who's helping in the industry.
And thanks for being part of Affordable Housing Week.
Bye all.